This is Ukraine. Ukraine is a country that lacks energy resources. Due to this reason, it has to import energy resources from different countries, principally from Russia. This causes that Russia will enormous influence over Ukrainian politics. The USA has presence in Ukraine in order to have more control over Europe. With projects like USELF, Ukraine can finance its renewable energy sector. And at the same time, it can reduce its dependence over imported energies by giving funds to create renewable energy projects. Until now, USELF has financed 7 projects. In order to change this situation, Ukraine government created a strategy to improve its energetical situation until 2030, with the priority of improving its energetical efficiency in the European energy networks and reducing its energy imports and producing its own energy. The USELF funding comes from monetary resources of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Ukraine and Russia are part of the recipient countries of investment. The recent conflict between these countries and the sanctions against Russia promoted by the USA compromised the position of Russia in the EBRD. The last conflict between them were about gas supplies and have repercussions in the USA and in Europe. Some argue that this conflict is about Russia wielding its power, and others said it's a conflict between oligarchies in both countries. McKinder's philosophy says that there is a pivot of history, from which the most important ideological, cultural, social, and economic movements, as well as historical changes, come. In the case of Ukraine, the heartland is Russia. It is important to mention that the heartland represents a leader state. And a leader state always tries to expand their influence by territorial, political, economical, and cultural control. In this case, the support of energy to Ukraine is not only for helping a country, but to have once again political and economic influence in the region. On the other hand, with Kellen's theory, we can identify that for states such as Ukraine, it is very important to have a rich territory of resources, such as fuel, natural gas, and renewable energies. The USELF program arises because Ukraine wants to have more sustainable energy power. For Kellen, another goal for the country is to have domain over a good economy. This will require a strong energy sector. Also, the concept of culture as an organization plays an important role in a state. Furthermore, his idea of the geographical factors, such as size, location, and natural resources, that it's a priority, it's a very important determinant factor of the behavior of the country. Wallerstein World System model explained the interactions between the core countries and the margin countries, which has mainly been a submissive relation of power of Russia over Ukraine, who follow their own interests on the area, and have doomed Ukraine to an uncertain stagnation of its economy. Russia had a great power in the bipolar world, and that makes the country a dominant decision maker in the world order nowadays. In one or another way, the margin countries, in this case Ukraine, will always be affected by decisions of the most powerful states. Application of concepts. Ukraine is a political unit that has sovereignty. This implies that the government of Ukraine has jurisdiction over its territory. Ukraine is located in Eastern Europe, and it's a focal point of the zone because it serves as an energy connector between Russia and European countries. The most important agents that we found in relation to the USELF program are the following: Ukraine, Russia, and financing members of the EBRD, for example, USA. Ukraine is in a submissive position because the dominant state on the European region is Russia. Therefore, Ukraine has to comply with Russia's demands because it's a country that has enough energy power to exercise control and influence over Europe. Ukraine's territory does not possess enough energetic resources, such as natural gas and coal, to satisfy its own demand of energy. Hence, it relies heavily on energy imports from Russia. Ukraine's interests are focused on the idea of producing their own energy capacity by means of decreasing imported fuels, natural gas, coal, and other energetic resources. Through the USELF project, Ukraine wants to generate new renewable energy projects for the future of the country's sustainability. When you consent to a decision, you are giving your permission to the group to go ahead with the decision. The Union, Europe, and Ukraine consent Russia's energetic decisions because his decision is the best one for Europe, and therefore cooperation arises because of that. Ukraine and Russia have constantly changed their relationship in the last 10 years. On the timeline, we can identify that Ukraine policies have been adapted to Russia's demands because of the necessity of energy resources. Energy generation is an issue that needs to be addressed in Ukraine. This underlines the necessity to improve energetic security and reduce the environmental impact in the energy industry. Ukraine's foreign policies are adapted because Ukraine relies heavily on Russia's energy resources. And we can see that in the relationship of these two countries on the different changes of president commands. Moreover, Ukraine was involved in conflict relations with Russia because they want to leave the Russian sphere of influence and integrate itself into Western institutions. In the last decades, Ukraine has been unable to adopt any policies at all because Ukraine's internal divisions in the past placed a different set of constraints on policy. Recently, Ukraine wants to reduce energy vulnerability, but the lack of strategy of Ukraine means that it's at mercy of Russia's actions. Moreover, we can identify that Ukraine is vulnerable to Russia's pressure, and the main reason of that is the high degree of dependency that Ukraine has over Russia's natural gas. Conclusions. Ukraine has to maintain political stability relations because it's a country that has less hegemony than Russia or European Union members. Ukraine has also a big trouble in terms of increasing power. The lack of natural resources makes it weak his intentions of economic, political, and social expansion. Russia is still a big decision maker in the country. The fact of supplying energy to Ukraine is proof of that. Ukraine is in the borders of the heartland, and it's also a periphery country because Russia belongs to the core. In order to revert this situation, EBRD is funding USELF that aims to create new renewable resources that will help to revert the Russian influence, but while doing this, Ukraine is becoming closer to the other core countries, like the US and Union. Conclusions about the classical and critical approach of geopolitics. According to the classical approach of Mackinder's, there is a pivot of history. This idea tells us that ideologies, cultures, societies, and economies change over the time. Moreover, this perspective helps us to understand Ukraine's necessity over new renewable energies. As we said before, the heartland of energy production is Russia. Therefore, the relation between both countries can be observed in a global perspective. Particularly, countries such as Russia want to promote a particular agenda, and we can see that through the leader state of the heartland. In connection with that, we can see that the leader state always try to expand their influence by territorial, political, economical, and cultural control. As we said before, the support of energy to Ukraine is not only for helping a country, but to have once again political and economic influence in the region. Moreover, complementing the idea of Mackinder, we use the Wallerstein approach to analyze the interactions between the core countries and the margin countries. In this case, we saw that Russia is the dominant decision maker, and the margin country is Ukraine. If we mix this theory with the critical approach of Kellen, we can see some differences because, as you know, the classical approach helps us to understand only part of the surface. But internally, behind the foreign policy, we can identify that having rich energy resources, such as fuel, natural gas, and renewable energies, it's very important because another goal for the country is to dominate their economy. This implies that we need to have a strong energy sector